Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. I was about 18 years old when this happened. Old enough to feel independent and capable, but still young enough to underestimate how quickly things can turn dangerous. That night started off completely normal, even fun. A friend of mine and I had gone to the movies together. It was one of those easy, forgettable evenings where nothing feels out of place. We laughed, talked about the film afterward, and when it ended, we decided to walk home instead of calling a cab. It wasn't that we couldn't afford it. We just didn't want to spend the money. The walk was a bit long, but it didn't seem like a big deal at the time. We were young, the night felt calm, and we told ourselves it would be fine. Looking back now, I realize how many decisions feel harmless in the moment simply because nothing bad has happened yet. I've always been a pretty vigilant person, especially when walking at night. Even as a teenager, I had learned to stay aware of my surroundings. I paid attention to sounds, movement, shadows, anything that felt even slightly off. That night was no different. We were walking and talking when I first noticed him. There was a guy behind us, walking in the same direction. He had his hood up, which immediately caught my attention. On its own, that doesn't mean much. People wear hoodies all the time. But something about him made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way he walked, or the fact that I couldn't see his face clearly. I can't fully explain it. It was just a feeling, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Every so often, I glanced over my shoulder to check where he was. At first, he was pretty far behind us, far enough that I told myself I was probably being paranoid. I didn't say anything to my friend right away because I didn't want to scare her for no reason. I just kept watching. As we continued walking, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. He was getting closer, not slowly, not in a normal, casual way. He was gaining ground much faster than made sense. We hadn't slowed down, and he hadn't started that close to us. Yet every time I looked back, the distance between us was smaller. My thoughts started racing. I tried to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Maybe he was just walking fast. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe I was overthinking it. Still, my body didn't relax. I felt tense, alert, ready for something to go wrong, even though I didn't know what. The last time I turned my head to look back changed everything. I caught him sprinting, not jogging, not walking quickly, sprinting straight toward us. And for a split second, my brain didn't even process what I was seeing. It felt unreal, like something out of a nightmare where your mind lags behind your fear. Then instinct took over. Pure panic shot through me, sharp and overwhelming. I shouted at my friend to run. I don't even remember the exact words I used. I just remember the urgency in my voice and the terror flooding my chest. I grabbed her arm, and we took off. That's when reality hit hard. She was wearing Birkenstock slip-on sandals, the kind that were really popular at the time. They were fine for walking around, fine for casual outings, but absolutely terrible for running. She struggled almost immediately, her steps uneven, her sandals threatening to slip off with every stride. I could feel her slowing down, panicking just as much as I was. I didn't let go. I couldn't. I held onto her and started dragging her along, half running, half pulling, my muscles burning, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I didn't look back again. I was too afraid of what I might see. All I could think about was getting somewhere public, somewhere with lights and people. Ahead of us, I saw a gas station. It felt like a lifeline. We ran straight toward it, adrenaline pushing us forward in a way I didn't know was possible. When we reached the gas station, I ran up to the window and started banging on it desperately. My hands were shaking so badly that it was hard to even make a fist. I begged the clerk to let us inside. I didn't care how I sounded. I didn't care how it looked. I just needed help. The clerk looked at us, clearly startled, but then he shook his head. He told us he couldn't let us in because it was past a certain time at night. I remember feeling this crushing wave of disbelief and fear. We were right there, so close to safety, and yet still exposed. But then he said something that gave me a small sense of hope. He told us that if the guy came near us, he would call the cops. He picked up the phone and held it in his hand, making sure it was visible. We stood there, pressed close to the building, our backs against the wall, breathing hard. Every sound felt amplified. Every second felt stretched thin. Then I saw him again. He came down the hill and walked through the gas station area, staring at us the entire time. His eyes never left us. It wasn't a passing glance. It wasn't curiosity. It was intense, focused, deliberate. I could feel his gaze like a weight on my skin. I remember thinking that he looked disappointed, like someone who had been interrupted. I truly believe the only reason he didn't come closer was because of the gas station clerk. The clerk was a big guy, and the phone was clearly in his hand. That small barrier, that one visible sign of resistance, seemed to be enough to make the guy think twice. After what felt like forever, he finally walked away. The moment he was gone, everything I'd been holding in came crashing down. My legs felt weak. My chest felt tight. I started shaking uncontrollably. I completely broke down, sobbing in a way I couldn't stop or control. The thought that kept replaying in my mind was unbearable. He had been running at us while my back was turned. He had been closing the distance, silently, intentionally, while we were unaware. If I hadn't turned around that last time, if I hadn't noticed when I did, things could have gone very differently. That realization terrified me more than anything else. What if I hadn't looked back? What if I had brushed off the feeling and kept chatting, distracted? What if we had walked just a little slower? What if the gas station hadn't been there? Those questions haunted me long after that night. Even now, when I think about it, I can feel that same cold fear settle in my stomach. The idea that danger can move so fast that it can close in without warning is something that stays with you. It changes how you see the world, how you walk through it. I still walk with vigilance. I still check over my shoulder. I still trust my instincts, maybe even more than before. No, that night reinforced something deeply in me, something I wish wasn't necessary to learn so young. Sometimes your fear isn't paranoia. Sometimes it's your mind picking up on signals before you can fully understand them. What scares me most isn't just what happened. It's how close it came to being worse, how a single glance, a single decision, a single moment of awareness may have been the difference between a terrifying memory and something far more tragic. That night ended with us safe, shaken, and forever changed. And even though years have passed, the image of him sprinting toward us while I wasn't looking is something I don't think will ever fully leave me. It's one of those stories that doesn't loosen its grip once you hear it. It stays with you. Not because it's loud or graphic, but because of how quiet and intentional it was. The details are simple, almost minimal. And that simplicity is what makes the weight of it so hard to shake. The more time passes, the heavier it feels, like your mind keeps circling back to it. trying to make sense of something that never fully will. I went to school with her. At the time, she was a freshman at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Like most first-year students, she was new to campus, new to independence, and surrounded by people who were all trying to figure themselves out at the same time. College has a strange way of flattening everyone into the same category at first. You're all just students. Faces blur together. Everyone is stressed, like excited, overwhelmed, hopeful, exhausted, and pretending to have things under control. On the surface, she didn't stand out in any obvious way. She wasn't someone people whispered about or avoided. She wasn't known for dramatic behavior or public breakdowns. If you passed her on campus, you would have seen someone who looked like she belonged there. Someone who blended in. Someone who looked like they were doing what thousands of other students were doing every day. That's the part that still messes with me. How normal everything seemed from the outside. People eventually learned that she hated her mother. Not in the casual, half-joking way people talk about their parents when they're young and frustrated. Not the kind of anger that comes and goes with arguments about rules or expectations. This was something much deeper, something that had been building for a long time, something unresolved, heavy, and consuming. I don't know all the details of their relationship. Very few people did, and even fewer probably ever will. Family dynamics are complicated in ways outsiders can't fully see. There are histories, patterns, wounds, and moments that don't show up in casual conversation. Whatever existed between them wasn't new. It didn't start in college. It was something that had been carried forward year after year, growing heavier instead of lighter. At some point, she decided to invite her mother to campus. She asked her to come to her dorm room so they could go out to lunch together. On its own, that doesn't sound alarming. In fact, it sounds hopeful. For a parent who knows their relationship with their child has been strained, that invitation would feel enormous. It would feel like progress, like a door opening after a long period of distance and pain. I try to imagine what that must have felt like for her mother, getting that invitation, reading the message, wondering what it meant. Maybe feeling nervous, but also relieved. Maybe thinking this was a chance to reconnect, to talk, to understand each other better. Maybe believing that college had softened something, that time and space had helped. To that mother, it probably felt like a turning point. So she came. She traveled to campus, likely feeling out of place among students young enough to be her child's peers. Walking across campus can feel intimidating if you don't belong there, especially as a parent. Everywhere you look, there's movement, noise, laughter, people going somewhere with purpose. She would have been surrounded by life, energy, and possibility. She made her way to the dorm. She walked down the hallway, past closed doors, bulletin boards, muffled music, voices echoing from other rooms, ordinary sounds, ordinary sights. Nothing that would prepare her for what was about to happen. When she reached her daughter's door, she found a note taped to it. "Mom, come in. I'm in the closet." On its own, that message wouldn't immediately suggest danger. Dorm rooms are small. Closets are sometimes used for privacy, for phone calls, for quiet. It might have seemed odd, but not frightening. Not something that would make a parent stop and call for help. She opened the door. She stepped inside her daughter's dorm room. Then she opened the closet. Her daughter had taken her own life. She had planned it so that her mother would be the one to find her. Not a roommate, not a friend, not campus staff. Her mother. That is the detail that makes this story unbearable. Suicide alone is devastating beyond words. It leaves behind shock, grief, confusion, guilt, and endless questions. But the deliberate choice to orchestrate the discovery adds another layer of trauma that's almost impossible to comprehend. This wasn't an accident of timing. It wasn't chance. It was intentional. Her mother didn't just lose her child. She was forced into being the one to find her. That image, that moment, is something no person should ever have to carry. It doesn't fade. It doesn't soften with time. It becomes a permanent imprint on the mind, a memory that returns without warning, a moment that rewrites everything that comes after it. On campus, the shock spread quickly. News like that doesn't stay contained. It moves through dorms, dining halls, classrooms. People whispered about it in low voices, unsure how to talk about something so heavy. Some people had known her personally. Some had spoken to her once or twice. Some had shared a class or lived on the same floor. Others knew her only as a name attached to a tragedy. Everyone reacted the same way at first. Disbelief, then horror. Then a kind of silence that settles over a place when no one knows what to say next. What haunted many of us wasn't just that she had died. It was how it happened. The planning, the note, the timing. The way hope had been used as part of the setup. The way a moment that should have been about reconciliation, or at least conversation, was turned into something catastrophic. It forced people to confront questions they weren't prepared to ask. How much pain does someone have to be in to do that? What kind of anger or despair leads to such a deliberate act? How little do we really know about the people we sit next to in class? How often does deep suffering hide behind normal behavior? College campuses are full of people carrying invisible battles: stress, depression, anxiety, family trauma. Everyone is trying to perform normalcy while navigating things they don't talk about. This story made that reality impossible to ignore. I still think about her mother. I think about her getting ready that day, choosing what to wear, driving to campus, maybe rehearsing conversation in her head, wondering what her daughter wanted to talk about, hoping this lunch would be a fresh start, or at least a step toward understanding each other better. I imagine her walking down that dorm hallway, surrounded by young people laughing, talking, living their lives, completely unaware that she was about to step into the worst moment of her own. That moment didn't just end a life. It shattered another one completely. No parent ever recovers from losing a child. But being the one to find them in a situation so deliberately arranged adds a level of trauma that's hard to even put into words. Grief becomes tangled with guilt, shock, and confusion. Questions have no answers. There is no way to rewrite that day. This wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a moment of sudden loss of control. It was planned, targeted, final. That doesn't make it easier to understand. If anything, it makes it harder. People often want to explain tragedies like this in neat terms: mental illness, family conflict, pressure. And while those things may be part of the picture, they don't fully explain the cruelty of the outcome. They don't make the pain easier to bear for the people left behind. Even years later, the story still feels unreal when I think about it. Like something too cruel to actually happen. Something you'd expect to hear about far away, not in a place you walk through every day, not in a dorm room like any other, but it did happen. I was there. I went to school with her. This wasn't an urban legend or a rumor that grew over time. It was real, and it left a mark on the campus. People didn't talk about it openly for long, but it lingered, in the way conversations would stop when the topic came close, in the way people checked on each other a little more carefully for a while, in the way parents suddenly felt more present during visits. It was a reminder that sometimes the most horrifying stories aren't about strangers or distant history. Sometimes they happen in dorm rooms, on ordinary campuses, behind doors with handwritten notes taped to them. And sometimes the damage doesn't stop with the person who dies. It spreads outward. It changes families forever. It scars witnesses and loved ones. It leaves ripples that never fully disappear. I think about that often, about how pain doesn't exist in isolation, about how one act can alter countless lives in ways that can never be measured. And I think about how important it is to take suffering seriously, even when it isn't visible, even when someone looks fine, even when they seem like just another student blending into the crowd. Because sometimes the quiet stories are the ones that leave the deepest scars. And this is one of those stories. Years ago, when I was working as a 911 operator, I took a call that I still think about more often than I'd like. It wasn't loud or frantic at first. It didn't start with screaming or chaos. It started quietly, in a voice that sounded hollow, almost emptied out of emotion. The man on the line said very plainly, "I found a decapitated body. There's blood everywhere. Please help me." There was something about the way he said it that immediately set my nerves on edge. He wasn't hysterical. He wasn't rambling. He sounded stunned, like someone whose mind had hit a wall and didn't know how to move forward. I'd taken plenty of calls from people who were panicking or exaggerating or even lying. This didn't feel like that. This felt like someone who genuinely believed they were standing in the middle of something unspeakable. I asked him where he was. He didn't know. That was the first major problem. This was years ago, before the systems we have now. No instant GPS location, no automatic address popping up on a screen. If a caller didn't know where they were, finding them could turn into a nightmare. I asked him to look around and tell me anything he could see. Street signs, store names, landmarks, anything at all. He struggled to answer. His thoughts seemed scattered, like he couldn't hold on to one detail long enough to describe it. He kept circling back to the same thing again and again. "There's blood everywhere. There's no head. I didn't do this. Please help me." I tried to slow him down, to ground him. I asked him to take a breath with me. I asked him to sit down if he could. I asked him to describe the space he was in. Oh, after a lot of repetition and gentle prompting, he said it was a big place. Empty. Echoing. He mentioned long hallways and broken glass. He said it felt like he was inside, but also like it went on forever. At that point, it was clear he was in shock. Severe shock. I've spoken to people who had just witnessed murders, fatal accidents, suicides. Trauma does strange things to the brain. People forget their own names. They forget where they are. They repeat themselves because their mind is stuck on one horrifying image. None of that by itself meant he wasn't telling the truth. But there were things that didn't quite add up. His phone number wasn't in our system. No name came up, no address history. I asked for his last name, and he couldn't give me one. I asked if he had ID on him. He didn't know. I asked if anyone else was there with him. He said no, then paused, then said maybe, then said he wasn't sure. Still, none of that made me dismiss him. People in crisis don't present neatly. My job wasn't to decide whether he was right or wrong. My job was to keep him safe and get help to him. Eventually, after a lot of careful questioning, we managed to piece together one solid clue. He said he thought he was in an abandoned mall. That was the first real foothold we'd gotten. There were only a handful of abandoned malls in the area, and fewer still that someone could realistically wander into. We dispatched officers to check all of them. I stayed on the line with him the entire time. I was afraid that if I hung up, he might panic, run, or collapse. He sounded like he was barely holding himself together. As we waited for officers to arrive, his fears seemed to grow. He said the body was close to him, then far away, then right in front of him again. He said the blood looked fresh, then said it was dark and dried. He said he could smell it, strong and metallic. He said it was on his hands, even though he insisted he hadn't touched anything. I asked him to look at his hands. There was a long pause. Then he started crying. He said his hands were clean, but he could still feel the blood on them. He kept rubbing them together, saying they felt sticky even though he could see they weren't. That was the moment when my stomach dropped. I'd heard that kind of confusion before, but never paired with something this vivid and this terrifying. When officers finally reached one of the abandoned malls, they found him almost immediately. He was sitting on the floor in the middle of a wide, empty corridor, knees pulled up to his chest, rocking slightly. There was no body, no blood, no signs of violence anywhere in the building. One of the officers recognized him. He was a missing person from a nearby jurisdiction. Everything clicked into place at once. This man hadn't stumbled onto a crime scene. He wasn't standing over a murdered body. He was in the middle of a severe hallucination. He had schizophrenia, and he had likely been off his medication for some time. Add dehydration, exhaustion, and isolation, and his mind had created a nightmare that felt completely real to him. In his reality, he was surrounded by blood. In his reality, there was a decapitated body. In his reality, he was terrified that he might be blamed for something he didn't understand. The fear in his voice hadn't been an act. It had been genuine. The officers approached him carefully. They didn't rush him or shout commands. They spoke calmly and gently. They didn't immediately tell him he was imagining things. They focused on reassuring him that he was safe and that help was there. They transported him straight to the hospital. He was severely dehydrated. He hadn't been taking his medication. He'd likely been wandering for days, confused and frightened, trying to make sense of a world that no longer matched what his brain was telling him. After being stabilized, he was reunited with his family, who had been desperately searching for him. He stayed inpatient for several days to recover physically and to get back on a proper medication regimen. The last I heard, the medication helped him a lot. See, but that call stayed with me, because for the entire time we were talking, that man was living inside a waking horror movie. One where he believed he'd found something unspeakable. One where he was completely alone in an abandoned place, convinced he was surrounded by death and blood. There was no escape from it because it was happening inside his own mind. Schizophrenia is one of those conditions people joke about or misunderstand, but moments like that show how cruel it can be. Hallucinations aren't always vague or dreamlike. Sometimes they are detailed, sensory, and overwhelming. Sometimes they hijack everything at once: sight, sound, smell, touch, and emotion. The brain doesn't suggest that something might be wrong. It insists that it is. That man wasn't dangerous. He wasn't violent. He wasn't a criminal. He was terrified and confused and completely vulnerable. I think about how easily that situation could have ended differently if he hadn't called. If he'd wandered into traffic. If someone had misunderstood his behavior and reacted with fear instead of care. If the officers hadn't recognized him. So many small things had to go right for that story to end without someone getting hurt. Calls like that change the way you see people in crisis. They remind you that not every horror involves a villain. Sometimes the horror is what someone's own mind is doing to them. and how real it feels while it's happening. That night didn't end in tragedy, and I'm grateful for that. But it left a deep mark on me. It made me acutely aware of how fragile our sense of reality really is, and how important patience and compassion are when someone is clearly not anchored to the same reality you are. And yeah, fuck schizophrenia. That poor guy didn't need judgment or suspicion. He needed help. And for once, he got it. It might not sound like the most sensational or dramatic story, but it's one that has stayed with me for years because of how ordinary it all felt, right up until it wasn't. There was no build-up that made you uneasy, no obvious warning signs that jumped out in the moment. Everything about it blended so easily into the background of daily life that, at the time, it barely registered as anything worth remembering. And that's exactly what makes it so unsettling now. At the time, I worked at a bank. It was a normal office environment, the kind where routines settle in quickly. You learn people's coffee habits, their schedules, the way they complain about Mondays and perk up on Fridays. You don't usually think of those places as settings for anything tragic. They feel structured and predictable, almost safe in their sameness. There was a guy I worked closely with, someone I interacted with almost every day. We shared tasks, sat in meetings together, and had the kind of casual rapport that builds when you spend a lot of time in the same space. There was also a woman in our department whose husband worked in a different area of the building. We all knew each other in that loose professional way that doesn't involve deep personal conversations, but still feels friendly. All three of us happened to be into golf. It wasn't a deep bond or anything meaningful. Just one of those surface-level interests that makes small talk easier. Golf came up in conversations about weekends, about vacations we dreamed of taking, about hobbies that helped us unwind after work. It was harmless, easy, and completely unremarkable. One day at work, my coworker and I were talking about a golf show that was coming to the Expo Mart that weekend. It was one of those large events with rows of booths, new equipment on display, demonstrations, and giveaways. The kind of thing that appeals to people who enjoy the sport, even if they're not serious players. We were talking about it casually, not even sure yet if we were actually going to go. The woman overheard us and mentioned that her husband was interested too. She suggested that the three of us go together. It didn't feel awkward or forced. My coworker had met her husband socially once or twice before at work events, so there was already a loose familiarity there. It felt like a natural extension of an office conversation, the kind of plan people make all the time without much thought. So that weekend, the three of us went together. I drove to my coworker's house first, and then we picked up the third guy on the way. The drive was easy. Conversation flowed naturally. We talked about golf, about work, about nothing in particular. There was no tension, no strange energy in the car. It felt like any other casual outing with people you know reasonably well. When we arrived at the Expo Mart, the place was busy and loud, booths everywhere, people milling around with bags full of brochures and freebies. The energy was upbeat, the kind of environment designed to distract and entertain. We wandered from stand to stand, checking out clubs, gadgets, training aids, and apparel. Some of it was interesting, some of it was ridiculous, and we laughed about that. At several booths, there were contests and raffles for trips, equipment, and experiences. We filled out entry forms almost jokingly, making comments about which of us would end up winning some luxury golf getaway. It was lighthearted and silly, The kind of banter that feels good precisely because it doesn't matter. Nothing about the day stood out as meaningful at the time. After we were done at the show, we decided to go out for dinner. We picked a place nearby, ordered food, had a few beers, and kept talking. Golf came up again, of course, but so did work, sports, random stories, and jokes that probably wouldn't be funny outside that moment. The conversation was relaxed. There were laughs. There were pauses filled comfortably rather than awkwardly. He seemed completely normal. If anything, he seemed engaged and present. He didn't withdraw or go quiet. He didn't hint at anything being wrong. There were no heavy statements, no emotional confessions, no moments that made you think, in hindsight, that this was some kind of goodbye. He was just another guy enjoying a night out. When the evening wound down, we dropped him off at his house. He thanked us, said goodbye, and went inside. It was casual and uneventful. Then my coworker drove me back to his place, and I headed home. That was it. At the time, that day didn't feel significant. It blended into the category of nice weekend outings that fade quickly in your memory. If nothing had happened afterward, I probably wouldn't remember it at all beyond a vague sense that it had been a pleasant day. But the next morning changed everything. Around 7 in the morning, he went into his garage. He tied a rope to the garage door track and took his own life. That's how I found out. There was no note, at least none that I ever heard about. No explanation that could make sense of what he had done. No message to his wife. No signal that something was about to happen. Less than 12 hours earlier, we had been laughing, eating dinner, and joking about golf prizes we'd never win. The news hit hard, not in a dramatic way, but in a hollow one. It didn't feel real at first. It felt like some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. You want there to be an error, a mix-up, something that will be corrected once more information comes out. But there was no correction. It was true. And suddenly, the ordinary day we had all shared was no longer ordinary at all. What made it especially unsettling wasn't just the act itself. It was the contrast. The way everything had felt so normal. Once you know how something ends, your mind automatically rewinds and replays every detail, searching for clues that weren't obvious at the time. You start questioning moments that once felt insignificant. A look, a tone of voice, a pause in conversation. You wonder if something was hidden in plain sight, if there was some sign you missed. But the truth is, there wasn't anything obvious to miss. That realization is uncomfortable in a way that lingers. It forces you to confront how little you can truly know about what someone else is carrying, even when you spend an entire day with them, even when you laugh with them, eat with them, and talk about plans that imply a future. In the days that followed, work felt strange. The bank still ran the same way. Customers came in, phones rang, emails were sent. On the surface, nothing had changed, but underneath, there was a quiet shift. People spoke in lower voices. Conversations felt more careful. There was a shared sense of shock that didn't need to be explained out loud. His wife was devastated. Seeing someone grieve in that way leaves its own kind of mark. There's no script for how to respond. Nothing you can say feels adequate. You become acutely aware of the limits of language, of how small words are in the face of that kind of loss. People speculated, quietly and uncomfortably, as people often do when faced with something they don't understand. Some wondered if there had been financial stress. Others talked about depression, about how it can hide behind a smile and a sense of normalcy. But speculation never brings clarity. It just fills silence with noise. What stayed with me most was the realization that the day before his death had been, by all appearances, a good day. Not a tense one, not a sad one, a good one. That detail challenges the way people often imagine despair. There's an expectation that someone who is about to end their life will look visibly broken, withdrawn, or deeply unhappy. But reality doesn't always match that narrative. Sometimes people are capable of compartmentalizing their pain so completely that it doesn't leak out in obvious ways. That thought is deeply unsettling. It means that you can sit next to someone, joke with them, and never know how close they are to a decision that will end everything. It means that human suffering can be invisible even in moments of connection. I still think about that day sometimes, about how close we were to him, how casually we interacted, how nothing felt off. The memory has a strange quality now. It's both vivid and distorted, colored by what came afterward. The laughter feels different in hindsight. The normality feels almost eerie. It's not the method that haunts me. It's not the headlines or the details people tend to focus on when they talk about these things. It's the quiet realization that someone can seem completely fine, even content, right before they decide not to be here anymore. That idea changes the way you look at people. It makes you more cautious about assumptions, more aware that what you see on the surface is only a small part of someone's reality. It makes you wonder how many others are carrying something heavy without letting it show. It also brings a kind of helplessness. Even if you want to help, even if you care, you can't help with what you don't see. You can't respond to signals that aren't there, and that truth is difficult to accept. Over time, the shock softened, but it never fully went away. The story didn't become less disturbing with distance. If anything, it became more reflective, less about the event itself and more about what it revealed. It revealed how fragile certainty is, how easily we believe that if something were wrong, we would know, that there would be signs, warnings, red flags. That belief is comforting, but it isn't always true. Sometimes people keep their pain hidden until the very end. Whenever I think back on that weekend now, it's not the golf show or the dinner that comes to mind first. It's the moment I learned what happened the next morning, the way everything before it suddenly felt different, the way an ordinary memory became something else entirely. It taught me that some of the most unsettling stories aren't loud or dramatic. They don't announce themselves with chaos. They arrive quietly, wrapped in normalcy, and only reveal their weight after it's too late. And that understanding, once you have it, doesn't really go away. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers for daily true horror stories that stay with you long after they're told, quietly unsettling and meant for the late hours. You can also turn on notifications so you're always here when a new story arrives and the night begins to stir again. Now, let's continue. Something deeply unsettling has been happening along the shores of the Pacific Northwest, particularly around the Seattle area in the United States and the Vancouver region in Canada. It's not something dramatic in the way crimes usually are. There's no single event you can point to, no clear beginning or end. Instead, it's been happening slowly, quietly, in a way that almost feels accidental. And yet, once you know about it, it's hard not to think about it every time the subject comes up. Severed human feet have been washing up on shore. Not once, not twice, but again and again. As of now, 24 separate human feet have been discovered along beaches and coastlines in this region. They've turned up in places where people go to relax. Sandy beaches, rocky shores, walking paths along the water. Now, sometimes they're caught in seaweed. Sometimes they're just there in plain sight, where someone might be out walking their dog or taking their kids for a day near the ocean. About half of these feet have been identified. Through DNA and forensic work, authorities have been able to link them to people who were previously reported missing. People who vanished years earlier, sometimes under tragic or mysterious circumstances. The remaining feet are still unidentified. No names, no families notified. Just fragments of people whose stories may never be fully known. What makes the situation even more disturbing is that in all but one case, investigators have not been able to determine a cause of death. Even more strangely, there has been no evidence of foul play. No knife marks, no saw marks, no signs that the feet were deliberately cut off, and no consistent injuries that suggest violence. No pattern that points to a serial killer or organized crime. Just feet, over and over again. When the first few were found, fear spread quickly. People naturally jumped to the worst conclusions. The idea that dismembered body parts were appearing along the coast triggered something primal. Many wondered if there was a killer dumping bodies into the water. Others imagined something ritualistic or intentional. The randomness made it worse. The fact that the discoveries kept happening without a clear explanation created a kind of background dread that lingered in the public consciousness. Eventually, investigators and forensic experts began to piece together an explanation that is now considered the most likely one. When a body decomposes underwater, especially in cold, moving ocean water, joints can naturally separate over time. The ankle joint is particularly vulnerable. It's a point where bones, ligaments, and soft tissue can break down more easily during long periods of submersion. On top of that, many people wear sneakers, and modern sneakers are often buoyant because of the materials they're made from. As the rest of the body sinks, breaks apart, or is consumed by marine life, the foot can detach while still inside the shoe. Because the shoe floats, the foot rises to the surface. From there, tides and currents can carry it long distances. Weeks, months, even years later, it can wash ashore far from where the person originally entered the water. On paper, the explanation makes sense. It's supported by forensic science. It aligns with what is known about decomposition in marine environments. It explains why the feet are often found still inside shoes. It explains why there are no tool marks or signs of intentional removal. It explains why remains can surface long after someone goes missing. And yet, even with all of that, the story still feels deeply unsettling. Part of that is because this phenomenon is almost entirely unique to this region. People drown and go missing in oceans, lakes, and rivers all over the world. Bodies decompose underwater everywhere. Sneakers float everywhere. But nowhere else has experienced this steady, long-term pattern of severed feet washing ashore with this kind of frequency. That's the part no one has been able to fully explain. Why here? Why the waters of the Salish Sea and the surrounding coastlines? Why this specific combination of geography, ocean currents, water temperature, population density, and human activity seems to produce this outcome again and again? Scientists can point to contributing factors, but there's no single, definitive answer that explains why this doesn't happen elsewhere in the same way. Then there's the human side of it, which is easy to lose when the story is reduced to statistics and theories. Each foot belonged to a person, a real person who lived a life. Someone who had family, friends, habits, plans, fears, and hopes. Someone who went missing and left people behind wondering what happened to them. In the cases where identities were confirmed, families were finally given some form of answer, but it was a brutal one. Finding out that your loved one is dead without knowing how they died, why they died, or what they went through doesn't bring closure. It confirms loss, but it doesn't resolve it. It turns hope into grief without offering understanding. And for the unidentified feet, there's an even colder feeling. Somewhere, there may be families who are still waiting, still checking phones, still holding on to the idea that their missing person might come back someday. They may not know that the only part of their loved one to ever resurface was a single foot in a sneaker carried quietly to shore by the ocean. What makes the story linger in people's minds is how impersonal it all feels. There's no villain, no crime to solve, no one to arrest, no final revelation that makes sense of everything. It's just nature doing what nature does, breaking bodies down and redistributing them in ways that clash violently with our need for order and meaning. It's unsettling because it reminds us that the world doesn't arrange itself into clean narratives. Things don't always happen for reasons we can understand. Sometimes there's no intent, no lesson, no explanation that makes it feel okay. It's also disturbing because of how ordinary the discoveries often are. These feet aren't found during dramatic recovery missions or deep-sea searches. They're found by regular people. Someone walking along the beach, someone out for a jog, someone enjoying a quiet day by the water. One moment you're appreciating the scenery. The next you're staring at a sneaker with something inside it that shouldn't be there, even knowing the science doesn't fully take the edge off. There's something about the repetition, the randomness, the way it keeps happening quietly, in the background of everyday life. Years pass. People forget. Then another foot appears and the story resurfaces again, just as unsettling as before. It forces you to confront how indifferent the ocean really is. It doesn't care about our need for explanations. It doesn't care about our sense of dignity or completeness. It moves what it moves. It reveals what it reveals, and it keeps the rest hidden. To this day, no one can say with absolute certainty that every single case fits the same explanation. No one can say there isn't an outlier or a factor we haven't considered yet. And even if the science is correct across the board, it doesn't make the image any easier to live with. A shoreline, a shoe, a foot, and the knowledge that somewhere beneath the surface, the rest of the story is still lost to the water, carried by currents that don't explain themselves and never will. I was 17, just weeks away from leaving for boot camp, and everything in my life felt loud, fast, and unfinished. That strange space before you leave home for something big messes with your head. You feel invincible and terrified at the same time. Every night feels like it might be the last normal one. Every bad idea feels justified because in your mind, you're about to disappear into a different version of yourself anyway. That's how I ended up at that party. It was out in the woods, the kind of place teenagers pick specifically because it's far from houses and streetlights. Someone's older cousin had found the spot years earlier, and it had become a regular thing. Dirt paths, trees packed close together, the smell of damp leaves and smoke hanging in the air. Cars were parked haphazardly along the edge of the woods. People clustered around cheap speakers and coolers, passing bottles and laughing too loud. I was there with a close friend of mine. We were drinking heavily, way more than we should have been. I remember feeling loose, reckless, buzzing with that sloppy confidence that only comes from being young and drunk and convinced nothing truly bad can happen to you. The night felt like it was spinning, but in a good way. like everything was unreal and temporary. At some point, the alcohol caught up with me. I wandered away from the main group, weaving between trees, trying to find a spot where I could throw up without an audience. I bent over, hands on my knees, retching into the dirt. My head was pounding. My mouth tasted like bile. And I remember thinking that this was going to be a rough morning. Then I looked up. Through the trees, cutting through the darkness, I saw red and blue lights flashing. Not faint, not distant. Close enough that they lit up the trunks of the trees in pulses. Police lights. The alcohol haze vanished instantly. That cold shock of fear snapped me sober in a way nothing else ever has. My heart slammed into my ribs. I didn't stop to think or double-check. I just knew what that meant. Cops were outside the woods, and if they were already there, it was only a matter of time before they came in. I ran. I sprinted back toward the party, stumbling over roots, pushing through branches, adrenaline flooding my system. When I reached the group, I was shouting before I even fully stopped. Cops. Multiple cops. Outside the woods. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. People grabbed bags, bottles were dropped, someone knocked over a speaker. It was like flipping a switch. Everyone scattered in different directions, instinctively trying to disappear into the trees. I took off down one of the dirt paths that cut deeper into the woods. My lungs burned, my legs felt heavy, and my vision tunneled as I ran. I could hear other people crashing through brush nearby, branches snapping, someone yelling in the distance. Then I saw him. At the far end of the path, maybe 30 or 40 feet ahead, there was a grown man. Not someone from the party, not a teenager. He was standing still, his body angled slightly away from me, his head turned over his shoulder, like he was listening for something behind him. Everything in me screamed that this was wrong. He didn't move like a drunk kid. He wasn't stumbling or panicking. He looked tense, alert, focused. And in that split second, my brain made a decision without consulting me. I dove. I threw myself sideways off the path into the bushes, not caring where I landed. I rolled under low branches, scraping my arms and face, dirt filling my mouth. I flattened myself against the ground, pulling leaves and branches over me as best I could. I didn't breathe. The man started walking down the path. His footsteps were slow and deliberate, crunching softly against the dirt. Each step sounded impossibly loud in my ears. I could see his legs through the gaps in the branches as he got closer. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it. He stopped. He stopped as close to me as he could be while still standing on the path. I was looking up at him through the branches, frozen. It was extremely dark, and I couldn't see his face clearly. Just the outline of his body against the faint light filtering through the trees. I remember the smell of damp earth, the sharp scent of leaves crushed under my weight, the way my muscles were screaming at me not to move. He stood there for a few seconds that felt like minutes. He looked around. I don't know what he was looking for. I don't know if he heard me dive into the bushes or if he was just checking his surroundings. I remember thinking that if he stepped off the path even a little, if he kicked the bushes or shined a light, he would find me instantly. But he didn't. After scanning the area, he turned and walked away, continuing down the path and disappearing into the darkness. I stayed where I was long after he was gone. I didn't move. I didn't breathe normally. Just I waited until my heartbeat slowed enough that I felt like I could function again. Only then did I carefully crawl out from under the bushes, my clothes torn and dirty, my hands shaking. I eventually found a few other people from the party. We were scattered, hiding in different spots, whispering to each other, trying to figure out how to get out without being seen. The woods felt different now, hostile. Every sound made me flinch. After what felt like forever, we managed to sneak out of the area, staying low, moving slowly, avoiding the main paths. My friend and I stuck together and walked back to his place, taking back roads and cutting through neighborhoods to avoid police. There was a lot of cop activity everywhere. Squad cars parked along streets, lights flashing in the distance, officers talking in clusters. It didn't look like a simple party bust anymore. It looked serious. We crashed at his house, exhausted, adrenaline finally wearing off. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man standing at the end of the path, looking back over his shoulder. The next morning, we were sitting at the breakfast table, trying to act normal, when his mom casually mentioned something that made my stomach drop. She said that all the cops in our town and the neighboring town had been out all night on a manhunt. She explained that a guy had robbed a convenience store, shot and killed the clerk, then beaten a woman badly and carjacked her. He had dumped the car and disappeared into the woods, the same woods we had been partying in. The room went quiet. I felt cold all over as the pieces slammed together in my head. The police lights, the urgency, the man in the woods who didn't belong there, the way he moved, the way he stopped so close to me. A few days later, the police released a photo when they finally caught him. It was the same man. There was no doubt. Same build, same face, same eyes I had barely seen through the darkness, but somehow recognized instantly. The realization hit me harder than anything else had. At the time, I laughed about it. That's what you do when you're young and scared and don't know how to process something like that. I told the story like it was a wild, close call, something crazy that happened before I left for the military. People reacted with shock, with disbelief, with nervous laughter. But as I got older, the humor drained out of it. I started thinking about how close that moment really was, about how I was drunk, disoriented, alone in the woods, about how easily he could have stepped off the path, about how if I had hesitated for even a second before diving into the bushes, he would have seen me. I think about what kind of person calmly walks through the woods after killing someone. About what he might have done if he'd found me hiding there, vulnerable and trapped. About how luck, pure dumb luck, was the only thing that separated me from becoming part of that story. It doesn't feel funny anymore. It feels like a thin line I crossed without realizing it at the time. One bad decision layered on top of another, saved only by timing and chance. I still remember the sound of his footsteps, the way my body locked up in fear, the absolute certainty that if he noticed me, nothing good would come of it. I went to boot camp not long after that. Life moved on. But that night never fully left me. It was the moment I learned how close danger can get without announcing itself. How it can brush past you in the dark while you're too young and stupid to understand what you just avoided. And how sometimes you don't realize how bad it could have been until years later, when you finally have the distance and maturity to see it clearly. That's what really stays with me. Not the party, not the cops, not even the arrest photo. Just the knowledge that I was lying in the dirt, inches away from someone who had already proven he was capable of killing. And the only reason I'm here to tell this story is because he didn't take one more step. My sister and I were staying at my grandparents' house. We were both pretty young at the time, but she was younger than me, and right in that phase where she thought she knew everything and everyone else was overreacting. She had recently become boy crazy in the worst possible way. The kind of crush every adult immediately sees as bad news. She'd already been pushing boundaries, sneaking phone calls, acting secretive, testing how much she could get away with. That night, though, none of us had any idea just how far she was planning to take it. The house itself was old and familiar, the kind of place that always felt safe simply because it had been part of the family for so long. The floors creaked, the doors were heavy, and at night it had that deep, settled quiet you only get in houses that have been standing for decades. We went to bed like any other night, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. I was fast asleep when it happened. All at once, the smoke detector started going off. Not just one alarm chirping because of a low battery. Every single smoke detector in the house erupted at the same time. The sound was sharp and frantic, echoing down the hallway and through the rooms, bouncing off the walls. It was the exact sound you'd expect if the house were on fire. I shot upright in bed instantly, my heart pounding, adrenaline hitting me so hard it felt like I'd been dropped into cold water. I threw my bedroom door open, fully expecting to see smoke pouring through the hall or flames licking at the walls. There was nothing. No smoke, no smell, no haze. The hallway looked exactly the same as it always did, except for the deafening alarms screaming overhead. That almost made it worse. My brain couldn't line up what my ears were telling me with what my eyes were seeing. I ran down the hall, checking rooms, checking corners, my mind racing through every worst-case scenario. I checked the kitchen. Nothing. The living room. Nothing. Then I went to my sister's room. Her bed was empty. The covers were pulled back, but she wasn't there. That's when the fear really hit. This wasn't just confusion anymore. This was panic. I didn't stop to think or try to reason it out. I ran straight to my grandma's room. She was already awake, sitting up in bed, just as startled and confused as I was, the alarms still blaring through the house. I told her, probably too fast and too loud, that my sister wasn't in her room, that she wasn't anywhere I could find. No, we didn't hesitate. We started searching immediately. We called her name, checked every room, checked the bathroom, the kitchen, the living room. We checked doors, we checked windows. The smoke detectors kept screaming the entire time, relentless and impossible to ignore. It felt like the house itself was shouting that something was very wrong. Those 10 minutes felt endless. Then the front door cracked open. My sister slipped inside, trying and failing to be quiet, clearly thinking she'd get away with it. She froze the second she saw us standing there, wide awake, staring straight at her. The look on her face said everything. She knew she was caught. Before my grandma or I could even open our mouths to yell, something happened that still sends chills through me when I think about it. The smoke detectors stopped. All of them. At the exact same time. 1 second, the house was filled with that piercing alarm, and the next second, there was complete silence. No gradual fade. No single detector lagging behind the others. Just instant, absolute quiet. Like someone had flipped a switch. There was still no smoke, no fire, no explanation. My sister, of course, got punished. There was no talking her way out of that one. She was shaken, grounded, and sent back to her room. Eventually, the house settled again, the way it always did at night. But neither my grandma nor I slept after that. Later, we sat together and talked about it. We replayed everything, step by step, trying to make sense of what had happened. That's when my grandma said something that made my chest tighten. She reminded me that my mom had always been obsessive about fire safety. Not casually cautious, but deeply serious about it. When my mom was young, her childhood best friend had lost their home in a fire. It had left a permanent mark on her. Because of that, My mom became known in the family as the firefighter. She always knew where the fire extinguisher was. She constantly checked smoke detector batteries. She drilled escape routes into us until we could recite them without thinking. She made sure we knew exactly how to get out of the house if there was ever a fire. Even now, years later, I can still picture those routes clearly. My grandma said very quietly that if there was one thing my mom would never ignore, it was a fire alarm. And that's when the thought hit me. What if that was her? I don't know how it would work. I don't know what mechanism could possibly explain it. I don't know why every alarm went off at once or why they all stopped the moment my sister was safely back inside. There had never been a malfunction like that before, and there was never one after. Just that night, just that moment. I'm not saying I have proof. I'm not saying I understand it. All I know is that something woke me up. Something woke my grandma up. And something stopped my sister from disappearing into the night without anyone knowing. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was some bizarre electrical failure that lined up perfectly with everything else. But deep down, neither my grandma nor I really believed that. If my mom could reach us in any way, if she could still watch over us, that's exactly how she would do it. Loud, impossible to ignore, focused entirely on safety, focused on protecting her kids. I don't have a better explanation. All I know is that she was there that night. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.